Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Hare, Shivasari, Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Hare, Shivasari, Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Krishna. I saw a documentary the other day on what happened with Rajneesh. It was in the, I think it was in the late 70s, right around the time when Prabhupada was traveling in the world, printing books and preaching, establishing deity worship in temples, and gathering a huge following of disciples. It was a time of big unrest for especially America, but really the whole industrialized world. The Vietnam War had dragged on, which seemed like forever, a war nobody wanted. And the young people, especially from college age, were looking for a different way different type of society, a different structure. They weren't happy with the government. They weren't happy with the restrictions. They were experimenting. So there were a lot of different groups that popped up around that time when Prabhupada took advantage of that environment to plant Krishna consciousness. Rajneesh was one group, and he came from India, and he attracted very wealthy people, famous people, powerful, influential people into his following. He had no regulative principles, and he really advocated free sex, which, there you go. Free sex and spiritual life. Boy, what a combination. It was very attractive to a lot of people. He himself, when I was watching the documentary, he had sexual activity with hundreds of people, hundreds of his followers. And he advocated that everyone should do that. If you wanted to become conscious of God, you should have. Just go ahead and do that. It didn't work out very well, because the seed he was planting was contaminated. And his managers, this one woman in particular, took over managing everything. And they did some really horrible stuff to try and become more powerful in society in general. They had a compound in Oregon, and they began poisoning the residents of the town so that they couldn't turn out for the next election. And one of the Rajneesh followers was running on the ballot, and if the people in the town were sick, they couldn't come to the polls to vote. And then they would get in. They'd get their person in, and they would take over the town as well as have their own compound. So that kind of consciousness began to develop. Greed, power, lust for power, greed. So it was anything but what you would want or think would really be advantageous for long-term development of love of God. So it was exposed, and the whole thing was broken up. But it lasted for several years, and it caused a lot of attention. And it was right around the time Prabhupada was preaching Krishna consciousness. There were other things. There were other groups too. You had Song Young Moon from Korean popular figure, and he was establishing his unification church. He was advocating that he was as good as Jesus, and now he was here to take everybody home. And that was attractive to a lot of people all around the world. I remember in Atlanta in the early 80s, this was right after Prabhupada left, just a mile away was the big Unification Church buildings. I remember the president of the temple in Atlanta was having trouble meeting the mortgage. It was a very fancy property. He was having trouble meeting the mortgage. And he was thinking of maybe selling the really expensive one and buying the Mooney property, which wasn't as nice, but it was adequate because he was feeling so much financial pressure. So you don't hear much about the Unification Church now. Again, his family began to manage, Reverend Sung Myung Moon's family began to manage the properties and his Unification Church. And they didn't have the same magnetism that Reverend Moon had. And then I think there was some infighting amongst the who was going to be in charge, who was going to manage the money, who was going to, again, power struggle. And that kind of lost its momentum. I don't think there were any huge scandals there, but it wasn't really like right on for the long term. And there were others too. There was a Christian group, the 12 Tribes, hiding in forests here and there. I ran into them in Oregon. And I think they've survived to one degree or another. But all these different, there were a lot of groups. There were more. They, the government, especially in the U.S., was keeping a close eye on all of this. Because they saw it like now they're worried about the patriots. Well, at that time, they were keeping a close eye on all the protests and these unusual groups. And Krishna consciousness was lumped in with all of that. So they're keeping a close eye on ISKCON. Is this another Rajneesh? Is this another Sung Myung Moon? It looked like that to them. That's what it looked like. especially when they saw the pictures of Lord Nishingadev. Ah, these people are dangerous. And then there was the lawsuits and the deprogramming. I was in Boston and a couple devotees were kidnapped. And that happened in Potomac also. Devotee kidnapped by their parents, paid these deprogrammers to deprogram their son or their daughter. Because they thought it was just a cult. Deprogram. Get them out of there. And then the lawsuits were coming, and the threat of losing all the property with these huge lawsuits, millions and millions of dollars lawsuits. And just fighting the lawsuit was expensive, never mind losing the lawsuit. I remember in Boston, the temple president, he had to go and to court like every day, sit with the lawyers to try to defend. So Krishna consciousness needed to be seen as a religion, a bona fide religion to survive. And I remember when, like in Atlanta, the temple president began to approach the Indian community more and more, needed help. They needed to see that this was authentic. It wasn't a Mooney thing or a Jim Jones. They needed to see what it was. And the Indians stepped forward and protected the movement. The authenticity, that it's from the Vedic culture. This is our religion. This Bhaktivedanta Swami is a teacher. He's teaching this. It's not a concoction. It's not. And so it survived. These others are all gone. They've had their disasters. And although there were some scandals at one point, right after Prabhupada left, the religious aspect is protecting Krishna. So I see there's a lot of complaining. Oh, it's just a religion now. It's just a religion. They've ruined it. They made it into a religion. It's not a religion. It's a spiritual movement. Well, yeah, that's true. It's not a religion. It's a spiritual movement. But the religion is protecting Krishna. Without that religious aspect, this movement would be done. Because it would be attacked. I saw it when it was attacked. In the late 70s, early 80s. The attacks were going on. Until it could be understood, no, this is a religion. This is a religion. If you attack us, you're attacking religion. And that's something that the government is not willing to be accused of at this point. It may come. And they certainly are nibbling around the edges of, gotta get rid of this religion. But they can't do it, at least overtly, at this time. So seeing like that really helps. Anyone can chant Hare Krishna and become ecstatic in love of God. Anyone. You don't have to worry about, oh, they've made it into a religion. Forget it. Forget all of that. The devotees are angry. I see a lot of followers are very angry. No, we need the religious aspect. It's protecting Krishna. Religion is protecting Krishna. Okay, you don't want to get caught up in it. I think that's all there is. And then there you go, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, and where'd Krishna go? You don't want that. But you have to see. It's protecting Krishna. Krishna, Chaitanya. More chanting. More chanting. More hearing. More praying. More worshiping. More remembering. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. More taste. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna Chaitanya.